I never thought the day of my father's funeral would be the day my entire world collapsed. Standing in the cold church, dressed in black, I felt numb. I'd lost my father, the man who raised me, the man who taught me right from wrong, the man who I thought trusted me above anyone else. The ceremony was quiet, filled with whispers of distant relatives, their eyes darting toward me with pity. I was his only son, his blood, his heir. And though grief wrapped itself around my chest like chains, I found comfort in the belief that at least his legacy, our family home, the small company he built from nothing, and the land he loved, would remain with me. After all, who else could he possibly leave it to? When the funeral ended, the family gathered at the lawyer's office. The room smelled of leather chairs and old wood, the kind of place where secrets lived in files, and people's fates were sealed with ink. I sat at the long table, my mother on one side, aunts and uncles whispering on the other. My heart was still heavy from loss, but I was ready to hear my father's last words. The lawyer cleared his throat and began. His voice was formal, detached, as though he were reading a grocery list instead of tearing apart the foundation of my life. "To my beloved son," he read, "I leave my watch, the one given to me by my own father." That was it. A watch. The air left my lungs. My ears rang, as if I hadn't heard correctly. A watch? Surely the lawyer had skipped a line. Surely this was some mistake. But then he continued, "All remaining assets, the family house, the land, the company, and financial accounts are to be given to." He said a name I didn't recognize. A stranger. A silence heavier than any coffin fell over the room. My relatives turned, staring at me with wide eyes. My mother's face drained of color. My heart slammed against my ribs, and my hands gripped the armrests of the chair until my knuckles turned white. Who was this man? Why would my father give everything to him, and leave me, his son, with nothing but an old watch? I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. The lawyer went on with meaningless details, but the words blurred. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears, the taste of betrayal thick on my tongue. When it ended, I stood without a word and walked out of the office. My relatives whispered, their voices sharp knives in the air. Did he do something wrong? Did his father hate him? I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers. But grief and fury tangled in my throat, leaving me in silence. That night, I sat alone in my father's study. The watch lay in my hand, its ticking louder than thunder. Was this all he thought I deserved? A reminder of time, of how little of it we had together. No. It didn't make sense. My father loved me. I knew he did. There had to be another explanation. Over the following weeks, I started searching. At first, I told myself it was just to understand, just to make peace with what happened. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was looking for a fight. I dug through his papers, his drawers, his files. Most of it was normal. Bills, old photographs, letters. But then I found something strange. In the last 2 years of his life, my father had started meeting someone regularly. The name of that stranger was the same one from the will. I froze, staring at the records. Who was he? A friend? A business partner? Or something darker? The more I searched, the more I found traces of manipulation. Documents signed when my father was already sick, his handwriting shakier than I remembered. Agreements that funneled money toward accounts linked to the stranger. Even visits from this man to our home when I was away. A sickness brewed in my stomach. Someone had been close to my father in his final days. Close enough to whisper lies into his ear. Close enough to twist his mind when he was weak. Close enough to steal everything he built. But why? I needed answers. One evening, I drove to the house that now legally belonged to this stranger, my house. My father's house. The home I grew up in. I parked across the street, the cold night pressing against the windshield, and watched through the windows. Inside, I saw him. Mid-40s, sharp suit, drinking from my father's crystal glassware as though he had earned it. My father's portrait still hung on the wall, but now it looked down at a man who had stolen everything. My blood boiled. I clenched the steering wheel, forcing myself to stay put. I wanted to storm in, demand answers, throw him out. But that wouldn't give me justice. No. If he was cunning enough to trick my father, I'd need to be smarter. That night, I made a decision. I would not beg. I would not whine. And I would not accept that this stranger had replaced me. If he stole my inheritance with lies, then I would take it back with truth. But not just take it back, I would destroy him with it. The plan began with patience. I started watching him, following him, learning his habits. Every evening, after work, he went to the same bar. Every Saturday, he visited the same woman. Every Monday, he made calls in the garden, calls I began recording from a distance with the help of a long-range microphone. The first recording was enough to confirm my suspicions. He mentioned deals, forged signatures, and making sure the sun doesn't interfere. My chest burned with fury. He had spoken about me. He knew exactly what he was doing. But rage wasn't enough. I needed proof that would destroy him legally, socially, completely. I couldn't just fight him in the dark. I had to bring him into the light, where the truth would burn him alive. Weeks turned into months, and I built my case piece by piece. I collected forged contracts, signatures that didn't match, financial transfers that had no explanation. I spoke to my father's old friends, who confirmed his declining health, how easily he was swayed in the end. The puzzle was coming together. And as I worked, a strange thing happened. The grief I carried from my father's death began to transform. It sharpened, hardened, until it was no longer sorrow, it was purpose. I was no longer just a grieving son. I was the executioner of justice. And this stranger had no idea that his time was running out. I knew from the moment I saw him sitting in my father's chair, drinking from my father's glass, that patience would be my sharpest weapon. Rage burns fast, but revenge is slow fire. For months, I gathered evidence like a hunter stalking prey. Every move he made, every careless word on the phone, every shady transaction, I caught them all. I built a mountain of proof, but I wasn't ready to strike just yet. Not until I could destroy him in every way possible. I wanted him to lose not only my father's fortune, but also his reputation, his allies, his freedom. He had stolen everything. Now I would take everything back, and more. It began with silence. I didn't confront him. I didn't warn him. I let him live in the comfort of his stolen empire, while I planted seeds of doubt around him. One by one, I contacted his business associates, anonymously, of course. I sent them copies of forged contracts, incomplete ledgers, small details that hinted at fraud. Just enough to make them suspicious. Just enough to make them question his integrity. The first cracks appeared when one partner pulled out of a deal. Then another demanded an audit. His empire wasn't falling yet, but it was shaking. I watched from the shadows, and every stumble of his was sweeter than honey. But whispers weren't enough. I wanted the world to see him for what he really was, a vulture who fed on the dying. The second step was personal. I discovered that the woman he met every Saturday wasn't just a mistress, she was married. And her husband was a man with influence, the kind of man you don't cross without consequences. So I sent him photographs. Not one, not two, but an entire envelope filled with evidence of betrayal. The fallout was immediate. The husband confronted him, his mistress abandoned him, and the story began to spread through the city like wildfire. A man who once appeared polished and untouchable was now whispered about in cafes, in boardrooms, in the streets. He was becoming a scandal. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. Step 3 was the strike. I compiled every piece of evidence I had, the forgeries, the financial transfers, the recordings of his late-night calls, and I delivered them to the authorities. Neatly organized, undeniable, and devastating. The police launched an investigation. His accounts were frozen. His associates turned their backs, unwilling to drown with him. The company that once seemed so solid crumbled overnight. And yet, I still hadn't confronted him. Not once. Until the day he came crawling to me. It was late evening when I heard the knock on my apartment door. I opened it to see him standing there, his suit wrinkled, his face pale, sweat beating at his temples. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "We need to talk." For the first time, I looked him in the eyes. This was the man who had stolen my father's last years, who had poisoned his mind, who had left me with nothing but a watch. And now he looked broken. Desperate. I led him inside, but I said nothing. He tried to explain himself. He claimed my father had wanted this, that he had been promised the inheritance for his loyalty. He said I didn't understand, that it wasn't personal. Not personal. My fists clenched, but I didn't strike him. Violence was too easy, too quick. My revenge wasn't about bruises, it was about erasing him. So I pulled out a folder from the drawer. Inside were copies of the documents I had given to the authorities, the proof of everything he had done. I placed it on the table and slid it toward him. His eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. You did this?" he stammered. I leaned closer, my voice steady, calm, deadly. "You stole my father's legacy. You thought you could erase me. But now, you're the one being erased. Piece by piece." His face drained of color. He begged. He swore he could make it right. He even offered me money, my father's money. I smiled. "You don't have anything left to offer." And with that, I opened the door and told him to leave. The trial came months later. By then, his name was mud, his reputation destroyed. Former partners testified against him, evidence piled high, and the judge barely needed an hour to reach a verdict. Fraud. Forgery. Theft. He was sentenced to prison. I watched as they led him away in handcuffs, his once proud shoulders hunched, his eyes hollow. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since my father's death. Peace. When it was over, I returned to the house, my house. The keys were once again in my hand, the doors open to me. I walked through the halls, touched the walls where I had grown up, and for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel grief pressing on my chest. I went to my father's study. The watch still ticked in my pocket, steady, faithful. I placed it on the desk and whispered quietly, "I got it all back, Dad." But the truth is, I didn't just get it back. I made sure the man who tried to replace me would never rise again. That was my revenge. Not in anger, not in violence, but in complete, undeniable justice. And it was beautiful.